Hello everybody! Happy Wednesday. My name is Elise and welcome to my tea table. Thanks for coming. Today we have a Constitution study group and together let's talk about how we can be reasonable citizens. Do you consider yourself a reasonable citizen? I try to consider myself. I try and obviously always need to try harder and learn more. So today's topic is on just that, being a reasonable citizen. And of course, this is all under context of what we've talked about last week and started the conversation last week around the topic of consensus. So yeah, let me know, do you believe that true consensus, a true agreement on a unified solidarity in a certain belief or set of ideals as a community, is that possible? And if it is possible, then we all need to be reasonable in order for that to work. Flexible, open-minded, and so yeah, again, I am streaming from the boardroom today, playing some very patriotic music from the late 18th century American music composer Andrew Barr. This is called the Federal Overture. I just thought it'd be nice to play some lively, appropriate music because before I get started talking about what it means to be reasonable and what things that we can do to become more reasonable, I'm going to talk about some constitutional news that's going on right now. Our country, the United States of America, is making history right now. Very important constitutional history is being made. A very important constitutional precedent is being made right as we speak in Washington, D.C. with the second impeachment trial for our last president. And so I just wanted to review, yesterday was day one, and there was actually a lot of reference to the Constitution, as well as reference to the intentions and the context of what the founding fathers, what the framers' intentions were in the Constitution, particularly in regards to impeachment. So we'll do a quick little review of that, and then I will go in talking about being a reasonable citizen. And I guarantee we are all going to learn something today. That's kind of my intent for today's stream, is myself, of course, learning, but bringing a new, interesting perspective to this conversation around being a reasonable citizen. We're all good people. You're here now, you're giving your time and your attention to this conversation, so you're obviously reasonable in that matter. But I think that there could potentially be things outside of our power, such as the mainstream narrative, which, media plays a big role of that, as well as politicians, how politicized issues, politicized ideas can actually affect our ability to be reasonable citizens. So I'm going to talk about that. Of course, referencing John Rawls' book, Political Liberalism. I may not be reading too much from the book today, just because I want to focus more on the discussion, but we will definitely refer back to this book when needed. My music player does not have a looper, so we'll just play the music when we want to. I'm going to drink some tea, though. I should get drinking some tea. I have not drank tea yet today. Been enjoying a beautiful day here in Las Vegas, Nevada. Went for a long run outdoors, took in a lot of sun, and really enjoyed my time. And now it's a good time to drink some tea. All right, I've got my freshly boiled water here all ready to go. and say hello if you're here. How's your week going? See that the lid is too small, unfortunately, but this is a beautiful gaiwan. I love the feeling of it. This is made by my friends Marie and Patrick at Handmade Marie's Teas out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's too nice of a gaiwan not to use. Hi Cecilia, good to see you. Welcome to my stream. I am doing a Constitution study group today, and we are talking about being a reasonable citizen. Do you consider yourself a reasonable citizen? And what does that mean to you? What does it mean to be reasonable when I say that? You are free to let me know what you think. Today I'm gonna drink some green tea, some Darjeeling green tea. Give me a little energy to get going for this stream. And I'm using boiling water here. I'm not gonna steep this tea for very long, so it's okay that I'm using the boiling water. I don't have my filter, so I'll have to go grab one real quick. Hey Mavelda, good to see you. Blessings. Pure aloha to you. Good to see you. So Mavelda, today I am having a discussion on being a reasonable citizen. Do you consider yourself a reasonable citizen? And what does that mean to you? What does it mean to be reasonable? I'm going to go into much more detail, citing some different academic perspectives on what it means to be reasonable. And if we actually are living in a current present time of reasonable citizens supporting a true democratic community. It is fire. Oh, Mafelda, I've got some updates on the work I'm doing for our project, so now's not the time to talk about it, but I've like got some new excitement. I was a little bit discouraged on the project because I wasn't coming across any like hard leads for what I want to do, but late last night I came up with the idea of what I need to do to make it happen. It's gonna be pretty magical. Yeah, I'll be right back, guys. Again, I am playing and this is called the Federal Overture, written by Andrew Barr in the late 18th century. Andrew Barr is known for being the most prolific composer or writer and publisher of his music compositions in 18th century America. So, educational music today. Compared to last night's stream, we did a pretty fun tea and art stream last night, and I was playing very peaceful, relaxing, meditative, what's called ambient electronic music. I'd never, heard of that genre. I mean, of course, I've heard those two words referred to music genres before, but it's actually I suggest that you look it up and check it out. But yeah, there's a lot in this particular piece. There's a lot of things that probably sound really familiar. And just kind of cool to like learn where a lot of these iconic songs came from. But yeah, last night's music, I got myself into a bit of trance. Ambient electronic. Look it up. It's kind of experimental noise music, but super meditative and also very kind of futuristic feeling and sounding. nice, rich, deep green tea here to get me going and charged. Oh yeah, could have shown you guys here. Very rich, very thick. I mean, doesn't even look like it's a green tea. It is brewing pretty strong here, so kind of hard to see this as a green tea, but it's good. This is a steamed green tea from Darjeeling. They use the same apparatus that they use to steam their momos. Momos are like Nepalese dumplings that are steamed. They use like a stainless steel stack of little steamers for it. Hey Bradley, good to see you. Much love to you guys, both of you guys. Love you guys. Thanks for joining in. So yeah, yesterday the United States Senate voted and declared that Trump's impeachment trial is constitutional because they argued about that. They had a little bit of an argument yesterday about whether or not the impeachment trial was going to be constitutional. So I am just going to go over an article, and this is from NPR. You know, a lot of people always ask me like what my favorite news source for reading news. I don't have a particular one. I mean, obviously there's ads everywhere, but it's okay. But I find NPR and BBC to be good sources. Hi Tea Break, welcome. Thanks for joining. I hope you're having a beautiful day. I am. Our weather is just gorgeous here in Las Vegas. I can't ask for anything more. I'm so grateful. Okay, so according to the NPR article that I'm looking at here, there was a vote in the Senate yesterday of 56 to 44. So there were still people, most of the Republicans voted that it was unconstitutional. But six Republicans did vote that this was, or this going to be a constitutional trial. Those Republicans' names are Senator Susan Collins of Maine, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Mitt Romney of Utah, Ben Sasse of Nebraska, and Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. Yeah, the shameless 44. I'm shouting out these guys because yeah, they stepped up, and actually one of them had switched. Who was that? Cassidy. Bill Cassidy of Louisiana had actually switched. Earlier on, he was voting, you know, that it was unconstitutional, then changed his mind. And then he went on to say that he thought that Trump's legal team did a terrible job yesterday. Several opinions on that, including from Trump. I heard in an interview, or not an interview, just an article somewhere with somebody's from Trump's team had made it known that even Trump found that his legal team is not doing a good job for him. I can't imagine that job being easy. So the trial would begin its next phase today at noon. So that's already passed. I think all the activities for today are done. And Trump's defense team will have up to 16 hours over 2 days to make its case for conviction or acquittal. 16 hours, that's all they got. So yeah, yesterday, the highlights of yesterday, the main viral thing that I think most people here probably know about was the video that was produced, edited, that showed, hey Ariel, welcome, good to see you, happy Wednesday to you. Yeah, I'm talking about the Senate's vote on the constitutional nature of the trial going on, the impeachment going on, and listening to this is the Federal Overture, written by Andrew Carr, who is the most prolific music writer of 18th century America. And so the reason why I'm playing this music is because yesterday at the impeachment trial, there actually was, for the brief moment that I went and watched the live feed of it, there actually was like readings from the Federalist Papers where, you know, as they were each making their case, we're trying to say, hey, this was the intention of the Founding Fathers. So I figured in today's stream, I'm usually doing the Constitution Study Group on Wednesdays. I'd use that chance to look at what the Founding Fathers had to say about impeachment and kind of the precedent of impeachment even prior to what we currently know as the United States of America. And so I'm just looking at some highlights from yesterday at the trial where the Senate did vote that this is in fact constitutional. So we're moving ahead, we're moving forward. So yeah, it opened up with a video of the story told from January 6th, a very well edited video that was moving. I watched about 3/4 of it. I'm sure if you just Google search or search on any video platform, you'll easily find this video. And if you have the time and are interested, it's worth a watch. It was beautifully edited and the story was beautifully told. Unfortunately, had a little bit of PTSD just watching that short video of, it's weird because the day of it was surreal. But then I kind of felt like after we all kind of processed, oh, there you go. Yeah, Bethalda, thanks for putting the link. A lot of people have been posting that video. It's moving. It definitely is. Just putting everything into perspective. But it was like, it's kind of weird because like when that all happened on the 6th, on January 6th, and then we processed it over the next week or so afterwards, we all kind of like memed it down into like, into jokes. And I think that was helpful in helping us kind of process that emotionally. But I think it also kind of numbed us to it a little bit. And so then watching it again yesterday, especially how they had edited that video together to kind of tell the story, the timeline of when different things happened, it was a very unique and different experience emotionally that I felt from it than watching it live happening on the 6th. Oh, thanks, Mafelda. Thank you for coming onto Facebook and getting that link. I'm guessing this link is to the video. I'll check it really fast and then I'll go ahead and reshare it. Oh, this is a different video. Well, this is great. I'm definitely gonna have to watch this. This looks interesting.
In the nation.
Oh, didn't mean to do that. I meant to pause it. Thanks, Mafelda, for sharing that. Thank you so much. Definitely. With the war, you're talking about the Civil War. Cool. Awesome. I'm definitely gonna check that out. Maybe at the end of the stream, I'll take a look at that before moving on. But I do have some important things to talk about, like really important about things that may even shake your own confidence in feeling like you are a reasonable citizen. You are an open-minded, open-hearted citizen, because there are certain ideas and cultural norms that we have just accepted that are actually not correct and are due to manipulation of the narrative by mass media, by politicians. And so I'm going to bring up one example in particular a little bit later that may shock us if I even learned something. I've traveled the world and I've seen and lived among cultures that have very unique perspectives, spiritually and religiously, than myself and the communities that I've grown up in. And so I always feel like, from seeing something from a different perspective, you're pretty knowledgeable, on where you've seen parallels and how you've learned things from those experiences. But I was even proved wrong, and I am excited to dive deeper into it today and learn about that. Okay, I'm not going to go into this whole thing, the Democrats' argument, like the actual fight. I don't want to talk about the actual trial so much as I do want to look at what's been said about what the Founding Fathers thought about impeachment and why they included impeachment in the like how did they know that was going to be an issue, and like what were they arguing about as they were drafting this part of the Constitution. So this is coming from the Constitution Center. This is actually whenever I do read the Constitution, I come to this website. I like this website. Just lays out all of the text very nicely. And so this is just constitutioncenter.org, and this is Constitution Daily, a smart conversation from the National Constitution Center. And this particular article was published in May of 2017. So this article is not relevant to the impeachment that we are experiencing right now. It's funny, in another article I read, someone had mentioned that like Americans are becoming impeachment experts because we're going through 2 of them in less than 1 year. It's never, anyway. Okay, so what the founders thought about impeachment and the presidents. One of the mostly hotly debated clauses in the Constitution deals with the removal of federal government officials through the impeachment process. But what did the founders who crafted that language think about the process and its overall intention? The need for the ultimate check, and in particular the removal of a president and a system of checks and balances, was brought up in early 1787 convention in Philadelphia. Constitutional heavyweights debated the impeachment clause at the convention, and Hamilton argued for it in the Federalist after the convention. There is a Federalist article, which I'm not going to read. I'm just going to read this article. This is as deep as I'm going to go. Today, impeachment remains a rarely used process to potentially remove the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States if Congress finds them guilty of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And all 19 federal officials have been brought up on impeachment charges by the House of Representatives since 1789, with 8 people convicted after a Senate trial. 2 presidents, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton, faced Senate trials but were not found guilty by a 2/3 majority of the Senate. And of course, that's what happened with Trump in his first trial, and why we're going through a second trial, because the first one didn't go through. The threat of impeachment remains a power check, at least in theory, against the abuse of power, and it is sometimes discussed in times of political controversy, as well in cases where there is a clear issue with personal conduct in office. Of the 8 persons impeached and convicted in Congress, all were judges who faced charges including perjury, tax evasion, bribery, and in one case, supporting the Confederacy. And I'm guessing, Mafalda, that's the one that is referenced in the video link that you shared with us. At the 1787 convention, Delegate Edmund Randolph quickly brought up the subject as part of his Virginia plan. William Patterson's rival New Jersey plan had its own impeachment clause. National Constitution Center scholar in residence Michael Gerhardt explains the differences in his book, The Federal Impeachment Process. So he says the Virginia plan provided for removal of officers upon impeachment and conviction by the federal judiciary, while the New Jersey plan neglected to include impeachment by the lower house and provided for removal only through application of a majority of the state governors. So a completely different process was proposed in this plan. Hamilton then introduced his own plan based on the British legal system, where governors, senators, and other officials could be removed for mal or corrupt conduct after being charged by the lower house and tried by the upper house. As the convention debate unfolded, not everyone favored impeachment, especially for the chief executive or president. Governor Morris and Charles Pinckney were both concerned about impeaching a president. Morris feared that a president would feel beholden to the branch of government that could impeach him, leading to a president becoming a tool of a faction. They were in the minority. James Madison saw the impeachment clause as indispensable for defending the community against the incapacity, negligence, and perfidy of the chief magistrate. Eldridge Gerry stated that impeachment was needed as a check against the presidential abuse of power. A good magistrate will not fear impeachments. A good one ought to be kept in fear of them, he argues. I like that. A good magistrate will not fear impeachments. A good one ought to be kept in fear of them. So George Mason then refuted Morris's argument that only the president's assistants should face the impeachment process. That's a bummer. No point is of more importance than the right of impeachment should be continued. Shall any man be above justice, he said. Benjamin Franklin also said in his unique way the impeachment was preferable to the more traditional way of removing a monarch in Europe by death. So at least we're a little bit more civilized than that to just kill. Eventually, Morris changed his thinking on the issue of executive impeachment, believing that the president should act more like a prime minister. And 8 of the 10 delegations voting approved the impeachment clause addition to the draft constitution. So that's like the British style. That was the one that Hamilton had originally introduced. Into August and September of 1787, the process became more defined. The Supreme Court was removed as a possible trial venue. A 2/3 vote requirement was required for conviction in the Senate, and George Mason added the words high crimes and misdemeanors, a phrase borrowed from English impeachment proceedings. Because at first, when the first draft came out, it was only for treason and they didn't have the high crimes. What's the other thing? Bribery. Treason, bribery. So those were going to be the only 2 crimes that would lead to an impeachment. But then they put high crimes and misdemeanors, which then opens it up for, a lot of interpretation. Hamilton argued strongly for the Senate and not the Supreme Court as the place where impeachment charges would be considered at trial related to the misconduct of public men, or in other words, from the abuse or violation of some public trust. Well, and then isn't there like a conflict of interest too, because then all of the judges are all commissioned by the president, by the executive, so that could definitely be a conflict of interest. I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to move myself so that I am a little bit easier for you guys to see all this. Get myself out of the way. They are of a nature which may, with particular propriety, be denominated political, as they relate chiefly to injuries done immediately to the society itself. The prosecution of them, for this reason, will seldom fail to agitate the passions of the whole community and to divide it into parties more or less friendly or... Aw, hi Nick, thanks. Yeah, today I am playing the Federal Overture. This is written by Benjamin Carr. Benjamin Carr, who is actually, I've come to learn, the most prolific music writer of the 18th century. So I imagine this is the vibe that the Founding Fathers were feeling when they were talking about this stuff. So got this on loop today. Glad you like it. I like it too. The prosecution of this for this reason will seldom fail to agitate the passions of the whole community and to divide it into parties more or less friendly or inimical to the accused. Inimical. A word I've never heard before. The high crimes and misdemeanors language remains controversial today. Okay. The framers meant for the phrase high crimes and misdemeanors to signify only conduct that seriously harms the public and seriously compromises the officer's ability to continue. If the phrase is given a less rigorous interpretation, it could allow Congress to influence and control the president and the courts. When the founders wanted to ensure accountability, they mostly relied on elections and the voters to hold government officials accountable for their actions, said Whittington. But what might fall into the category of other high crimes and misdemeanors was still quite unclear. So that's that. That's that article. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for being here. Thanks for saying hi. I hope you're having a beautiful day, enjoying this beautiful weather in Las Vegas, Nevada. I enjoyed it very much. All right, you know what, Mafelda? I'm gonna go ahead and share this video. It looks like a short one, so let's just do this, and then this will help us transition. Oops, you guys are seeing all my messages. How rude is that?
False to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future. Those were the words of Frederick Douglass, former slave turned national leader for the abolition of slavery, whose opinion, President Abraham Lincoln said, was the most important in the nation. A month before the end of the Civil War, Lincoln called for the Union to honor Black Americans with the right to vote, and 3 days later he was shot and killed by the Confederate terrorist John Wilkes Booth. Now, Lincoln had picked a Southerner, Andrew Johnson, as his vice president in the hopes of unifying a divided country. When Johnson took over the presidency, he was supposed to oversee the prosecutions of 39 Confederate leaders responsible for the bloodiest war in U.S. history that the South thought was a righteous rebellion to protect slavery. Judge John C. Underwood presided over the case, and he was furious that Confederate leaders, with hands dripping with the blood of our slaughtered innocents and martyred president, were still at large. Judge Underwood's court issued a warning. Failure to convict would embolden future rebellions and more acts of treason. He spoke to the jury directly, and he said, "It's for you to teach them that those who sow the wind must reap the whirlwind, that clemency and mercy to them would be cruelty and murder to the innocent and unborn." Confederate General Robert E. Lee and the Southern Shadow President, Jefferson Davis, faced capital punishment if they were to be found guilty. The charge was being moved and seduced by the instigation of the devil to subvert and to stir, move and incite insurrection, rebellion, and war against the United States of America. But there were countless delays. President Johnson was protesting against including black jurists, and 1 month before the end of his term, Johnson just drops all the charges. Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis and 37 other Confederate leaders just walk away. In fact, the only American found guilty of treason during the Civil War was John Brown, an abolitionist who fought to end slavery. And for that, Brown was hanged for the crime of treason against Virginia. And witnesses to his hanging were none other than General Robert E. Lee and John Wilkes Booth. For General Lee and the Confederates, there'd be no convictions. And what happened next? Northern U.S. congressmen don't want to seat Confederates or their sympathizers in Congress. They want a Union military presence in the southern states to maintain law and order, and they want to pass protections for Black America. But President Johnson vetoes those protections and fires one of his so-called radical cabinet members who agrees with them. And as a result, Johnson is the first president to be impeached, but he escapes conviction in the Senate. And so Reconstruction and reconciliation are compromised and crippled. Statues of Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis are built to commemorate white supremacy and treason, and myths around states' rights and Southern pride live on as a transparent cover for the shame of an ideology of extreme brutality and delusional supremacy. And that culture of the Confederacy rises again and again. Anti-democratic, anti-science, anti-black, anti-brown, anti-immigrant, anti-everything, and anything that isn't their clan. And century after century, so-called white moderates find unscrupulous reasons to accommodate these white supremacists for their own self-interest, for their lack of courage. And Black America, Native America, everybody else, be damned. And so now we see today, rising from the boneyards of America's unatoned sins, Marjorie Taylor Greene, a terrorist sympathizer who signaled approval for political assassinations, who disparages Jews and Muslims, who publicly harasses child survivors of school shootings, which she claims are just conspiracies to steal her guns, who Republicans elected into our Congress and Republican leadership rewarded with a position on the Education and Labor Committee. These people are not only uninterested in unity, they openly embrace political violence. This is not white privilege, it's our recurring white nightmare, haunting us century after century with their suicidal fantasy that nobody really belongs here but them. 147 Congress members committed treason when they voted to overthrow our democracy. 147 Congress members now claim with forked tongues to have only represented the hordes that welcomed their lies. No, those 147 traitors who made every effort to subvert, stir, move, and incite insurrection and rebellion against our country must be expelled from public office, tried, and convicted in a court of law. Their sponsors, enablers, and promoters must all face boycotts and cancellations and be hauled into court on charges of sedition. For the millions of descendants of African slaves and the survivors of Native American Holocaust, for every citizen of our migrant nation who believes in equality for all people, it is for you to teach them that those who sow the wind must reap the whirlwind, that clemency and mercy to them would be cruelty and murder to the innocent and unborn. In the words of Frederick Douglass, if this war is to be forgotten, I ask in the name of all things sacred, what shall men remember? We must never forget that victory to the rebellion meant death to the republic.
Okay, well, Mafalda, thank you so much for sharing that with us. That was
How did I reel again?
definitely an intense one. And so I guess that's a good segue. Well, we just watched their, that was an intense one. I'm going to segue into something a little bit more positive, a little bit more actionable of what we can do as just normal people to become more reasonable and to inspire others around us, no matter how important or how insignificant we may seem or think that could be. It was intense, Mafalda, but that's okay. It's okay. You know, we can't be scared of intensity when we're trying to make change. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. That segues into modern times, right? So we just visited what the Founding Fathers wanted. And that video, it was powerful, Nick. Yeah, that video really brought to light, systemic issues that we might have thought are long forgotten are still very strong and very powerful today. And we aren't politicians, we aren't lawmakers, so unfortunately we can't do anything in that capacity to make change, but we can become reasonable citizens. And last week, I introduced this book. I read quite a bit. I read from 3 different chapters in the book. It was a long stream last stream, and felt like we made a couple of big breakthroughs. So this book called Political Liberalism, written by John Rawls, who is highly regarded thought leader in politics and law, especially around the topics of justice and consensus, which is the backbone of democracy. It's like how can any kind of consensus be drawn by lawmakers or politicians or judges if we don't have democracy? Or how can we have democracy if we don't understand what our consensus is, even though we are such a diverse community? And it's interesting because we are far more diverse now than we were at the time of the writing of the Constitution. And so it's interesting how the forefathers were able to draft such a comprehensive document that is still alive and being used today, even though they didn't know what level of diversity that we were going to be in the year 2021. So the first step in his framework, as you can see, his framework is long. This is a collection of lectures that he did, and in his introduction, it's always good to read the introduction because it kind of talks about the overarching theories of his framework. But basically, the first step in his framework is that we have to come up with a comprehensive, reasonable consensus. That's the term that he uses to describe when we are able to come up with a consensus. Again, consensus means there's 2 definitions for consensus. One of them is kind of like a vote. It's like everybody votes, and then the majority winning vote is the agreed upon consensus of that group. And then the other definition is solidarity in a common belief among the group. And so it's not necessarily a vote, but it's like what everybody consciously agrees that we have in common with each other and that we're going to move forward on. And so the Constitution is a very powerful document of consensus that we have. Like, regardless of what we think and what we want, we all have to have solidarity in what the Constitution says as our code and protocol of civility. So, but things become really tricky when you get beyond Constitution of starting to to come up with the nitty-gritty details about how we serve justice or how we handle property ownership or even writing laws for different communities. Things are very different everywhere. How do we come up with the consensus? And so in his book, the comprehensive, reasonable consensus is what we have to first understand. We have to define that for our community. And so that's where the theme of today comes in, a reasonable citizen. So that's the word. Reasonable is like if you use reason, if it's logical, regardless of what moral angle it comes from. What's reasonable is what is like not violent or not going against what we agree to be bad, or it's kind of like a defined, agreed upon good between everybody. And something that I was recently educated on from a good friend of mine, something that I thought I already knew about, is in regards to Islam. And I wanted to use that as an example today to look on, because we have all different doctrines. Oh, I'm sorry. I was using the totally wrong word. I just now remembered that I was calling everything comprehensive, reasonable consensus. That is wrong. It's comprehensive, reasonable doctrines. And so these are all the different doctrines, all the different viewpoints that can exist within a community. You identify all of them and say, that's reasonable, that reason. And then perhaps, you come across somebody who identifies with being a Satanist and wants to live a life of violence and is kind of going against what that community would be considering reasonable. Then that doctrine would be eliminated from that solidarity of some agreed upon belief. Like, their perspective may not be valid because the community would consider them not reasonable. And so, Satanism, which, I don't know how valid of a doctrine that is, but, you see it in movies and such, and so you hear about it there. So that's like an extreme example of like an unreasonable doctrine that we could probably all agree upon, that if your neighbor was a Satanist, or if a politician that was writing laws for you as a Satanist, you would probably say, oh, that's not reasonable. That person is not included with my solidarity of what I think our community's consensus should be. And so that brings me to the next topic, which is not an extreme case of an unreasonable doctrine, but something that I think the mass media and the political narrative has gotten most people in Western society to consider to be an unreasonable doctrine. And that's the source of oppression. That's the source of marginalization. Like, when you think someone else's perspective is unreasonable, you are immediately marginalizing them to not be up in your level. So we'll marginalize a Satanist and be like, yeah, I don't want to hang out with you, Satanists. You your ideas of good and bad are a lot different than mine. We're not going to hang out. But there are other things like Islam. I think Islam is something that, regardless if we are directly in touch with it or not, that narrative, that political narrative, has created fear and has created an idea of unreasonableness for that ideology, for that doctrine. And so then what happens is non-Muslim, anybody who's not a part of that doctrine or believing in that doctrine, would alienate and marginalize that perspective. And then people of that doctrine will separate themselves as well because they feel alienated. They feel like they can't talk about their spirituality. They can't talk about their ideas among their peers and among their community because they probably have been hated and judged their entire life, right? And so there's one particular term, and this was the term that I got educated on, that I want to kind of go over right now with you guys, and hopefully it'll be an education for all of you all, is the term jihad, right? So I was first introduced to the term jihad, probably like most Americans, after 9/11, because a lot of the radical Islamic groups every Muslim identifies jihad as the source of their work, their motivations, and what they do, right? And so after 9/11, that was like really, I was still young, I was still a teenager, and so I had, grown up in South Texas. At that time, I was in Central California, where, there really isn't a presence of Islam, or at least one that I got exposed to. And so my whole education about Islam came from what happened after 9/11. And I don't think that I'm unique in that. Fortunately, I have traveled, and actually my first Peace Corps assignment that I did in Niger, West Africa, was among a Muslim society. They prayed 5 times a day. I learned about Ramadan. I learned about lots of different things. I didn't learn fully about it, but I do feel privileged and I do feel fortunate that I did get that perspective. And actually, to be honest, like of all the different religions that I've been exposed to, that brand of Islam that I woke up to in my community every single day for 2 years was very peaceful. And it had me asking a lot of questions like, what's up with all this like negative talk around Islam? Like, they are just like super focused on their own personal relationship with God, and there's no like politics and hierarchy in the church system itself, in the spiritual system. There may be in other political systems, but in your prayer, in your act of prayer, in your act of pursuing your relationship with God, it's like autonomous. It is beautiful. It is amazing. And I was really impressed with that. And I'm like, what the heck? And so like, I kind of took, I took a responsibility in like helping educate my friends and family around that experience. Because I came back and still hearing a lot of misconceptions around Islam. And yeah, Nick, you were born in 95, so the conditioning is broad. Yeah, you were very young when that came out. And the narrative and the rhetoric around Islam in the United States has not changed much since 9/11, unfortunately. And that fucking sucks. But I did become, I was exposed to the term of jihad once again when I was in the Peace Corps, when I was living among that community. And the word even there had a negative connotation to it of like, all right, well, I'll share my story first. So like when the villagers that I hung out with, if they ever used the word jihad, or if I was traveling around and meeting different groups, if they ever used that term jihad, it was always used to explain the conversion. Because especially the village that I lived in, like they still practice animism, and they have to like secretly like be closet animist. That's like voodoo. That's like the very traditional, spirituality of like seances and mediums for spirits and fortune telling and all of that, which I got exposed to, and that was an awesome experience too. That taught me a lot about spirituality and opened my heart for a lot of that, because I went into that experience very much a skeptic. But they would use the word jihad to describe the time of conversion, of when their ancestors were living on the land and colonizers, essentially, Muslim colonizers, from the Middle East or from northern Africa came and colonized their lands, and they had used the word jihad to describe that. And that included like taking slaves. Like I went through some communities and I go visit the chief because I want to do a project. I want to meet with the chief and talk business and do that. And some of the villages I went to, especially like higher up north, into the Sahara Desert, the chiefs would be in these huge compounds. And they'd be like light skin, like Tuaregs or lighter skin. And then their compound would be surrounded with a whole community. And I came to learn that, yeah, you're right. Animism is a very different thing. Even the word voodoo is like, animism is a very different thing. I don't even know the origins of voodoo. But for most people, that's the word that I have to use for them to understand what animism means. But that was like an incredible spiritual experience to have. And the lineage of that, you can feel it. You can feel the lineage of that practice. Although everybody in my village still prayed 5 times a day and went to the mosque and practiced Ramadan and were good Muslims. Because there was this fear, they would talk about it. They'd be like, we have a fear, because jihad, these guys want, we have to comply with what's going on. But yeah, I'd visit these chiefs and of course meet the people in the community around as I'm going into the home, and come to find out that they're like multi-generational slaves of the chief. And as long as they can remember, they've been, and they all use the word jihad to describe. So like that was my idea of what that word meant. And just a few nights ago, my friend educated me that even that definition is incorrect and highly politicized. And damn, we have a lot to learn. We really do. So I'm going to go ahead. Well, first of all, before we look at the real definition, I'm just going to do like a quick Google search, like a Google News search of the word jihad. Like I'm adding United States to the search term because if you search it without United States, it's a lot of international news. So, I just said United States so we can see like for US based media, what are the headlines around the word jihad. And everything is like military. Everything is about the war. Everything is about extremists, about radical Islam. Like nothing here about like the real meaning of jihad. And so it's easy to understand why most Americans would just umbrella this term to mean, something violent and something dangerous and something unreasonable that shouldn't be included in our consensus. In our society and our ideas that we all have solidarity in. And again, that is going to alienate those folks and then inhibit us from having a true comprehensive doctrine, a true comprehensive reasonable doctrine, because there are millions and millions of reasonable Muslims in our society that like anytime you mislabel this word jihad to them, like you are offending them. Like it's very offensive to them. Like even whenever I mislabeled jihad with my friend, he was very offended. He was very fast to correct me, which is good. This is what we need. Like if you are coming from a marginalized perspective, like you have every right and should speak up, even when your close friends and people that you love express a misinterpretation of your doctrine. I wasn't trying to say that jihad in itself was unreasonable. I was trying to say, no, jihad means something much different than what we may think it means. It's a spiritual, religious ambition of, so anyway, going past this like news search, we all get it. The mass media and the narrative is telling us that jihad is a violent, aggressive, warlike concept associated with Islam. Okay, so this is just coming from the Wikipedia page. So, there could be some errors here. So take it with a grain of salt. But this is just a good baseline for us to start on. So jihad is an Arabic word which literally means striving or struggling, especially with praiseworthy aim. In an Islamic context, it can refer to almost any effort to make personal or social life conform with God's guidance, such as struggle against one's evil inclinations. Though it is most frequently associated with war. What's this? This community. The Arabic word for community is distinguished with shab, which means a nation with common ancestry or geography. In classical Islamic law, the term refers to armed struggle against unbelievers, while modernist Islamic scholars generally equate military jihad with defensive warfare. In Sufi and pious circles, spiritual and moral jihad has been traditionally emphasized under the name of greater jihad. The term has gained additional attention in recent decades through its use by terrorist groups. So the word does appear frequently in the Quran, with and without military connotations, often in the idiomatic expression striving in the path of God. So in modern era, the notion of jihad has lost its jurisprudential relevance and instead given rise to an ideological and political discourse. While modernist Islamic scholars have emphasized defensive and non-military aspects of jihad, some Islamists have advanced aggressive interpretations that go beyond the classical theory. Jihad is classified into inner greater jihad, which involves a struggle against one's own base impulse, and external lesser jihad, which is further subdivided into jihad of the pen or tongue, or jihad of the sword. Most Western writers consider external jihad to have primacy over inner jihad in the Islamic tradition, while much of contemporary Muslim opinion favors the opposite view. Very important. Here's a sentence that sums this whole thing up. Most Western writers, and that includes politicians, that includes media, consider external jihad. So external jihad is the fight against things outside yourself and protecting your dogma, while the inner jihad is your inner work. And so they, prioritize that outer external jihad over the inner jihad. Most Muslims, if you were to ask them, my friend had corrected me, the opposite is true. As it says here, the Gallup analysis of a large survey revealed considerable nuance in the conceptions of jihad held by Muslims around the world. So even Muslims themselves, when you talk to them, just like the Muslims that I lived with, their definition of jihad was very different than what, a modern Muslim scholar would say. So basically, I'm not going to go into much more detail on this. Of course, we can, but the purpose of bringing all of this up was because this in itself of even me as a traveled, culturally, what's the right word? Culturally empathetic person. I identify myself as pretty culturally empathetic. I was even making mistakes about understanding someone else's doctrine. I definitely didn't have as skewed of a perception around it as, like mass media, or, because like, of course, they want to incite, they want to generate fear. But in doing that, we're alienating that whole community of people. And it's not just Islam. Like, there are so many different perspectives and doctrines that we may consider, and we probably don't even think about it. It's just so ingrained, and it's been part of that narrative our entire lives, that like it's part of our culture of having this misperception of someone else's doctrine, someone else's viewpoint on the world, and idea of what is moral and what is right, that we excluded as like a valid doctrine to be a part of our overall comprehensive, reasonable doctrine. So that brings me to my next claim, that in that, everyone is being unreasonable. Is that reasonable to not be inclusive of somebody else's perspective? No, it's not. So, this is going to take a lot of work. This is not like going to happen overnight and going to be like an easy thing to resolve. It's going to take a lot of work to navigate all of this, and to kind of like undo. Like, we've got to undo a whole bunch of conditioning that we have, and it may be conditioning that like we don't even know that we need to undo. And so this idea of jihad and Islam is just one example. It's just one example. There's so many other, and a lot of them are related to race and culture and your background, being an immigrant. Like, if you're coming from a different culture and you're new to this culture, and your neighbors alienate you and make you feel like your perception and your viewpoint is not reasonable and is like demonized even, of course you're gonna like alienate yourself and say, fuck this, I'm not a part of this community, and not engage with it. And in not engaging with it, then you are not helping to contribute to that comprehensive, reasonable doctrine. On Bitcoin, what do you think about that? So yeah, unfortunately, I think that we are at a current state where not a single one of us can claim that we are reasonable citizens. Even me. I'm gonna take responsibility for that, because like I learned the other day, I was freaking educated the other day. I didn't even know that, and I thought that I was like a step ahead of my peers, and I mean, maybe I was. I definitely, like, we had another friend with us, and I asked him, I said, hey, what do you think of jihad is? Like, have you heard that word before? He says, yeah, I've heard that word before. And then I said, did you know that this is an important word to our friend? It's like basically like nirvana for a yogi, or, like reaching, like, your path towards reaching that level of enlightenment, that, it's your path towards your relationship with God. Like, that is like a very core foundational term and idea for millions of people. And he's white, and he says, yeah, I've heard that word before. I think it means it's like war. It's like religious war for Muslims. And I was like, no, yeah. I mean, and so the fact that we would think that, we'd have that perception, and then, like, let's say we're at a workplace, like we are here, and your neighbor sitting next to you says something about jihad, and it's like, whoa, red flag. Are you militant? Are you going to try to do something here? And it's like, absolutely not. Like, yeah. So yeah, Mafalda, you're right. It starts with education. And that's what we did today. Had a little education, had a little fun. I don't know, I had fun. I liked this music. I learned some things today. Always looking forward to learning more. Yeah, there are a lot of perspectives and doctrines. I'll use that term, doctrines. There are a lot of doctrines in modern society that, like, we just need to hold space for it. We need to really understand it and and then understand, like, if there is somebody else that's misrepresenting that, like, let's say, okay, well then it's the extremist groups that are the problem. They caused this problem. It's their fault that we've associated such an important word to every Muslim in this world with something so violent and negative. It's their fault. And it's like, well, no, their fault for what they did, but it's our fault for not learning, for not seeing deeper than the narrative that the mainstream media and politicians have to offer to us. Like, we've got to do our own education, go above and beyond. And right here, Wikipedia was like good enough. Like, I'm sure I could like pick up some articles of like Islamic scholars talking more deeply about the history of jihad and its like evolution throughout history. And then, you know, we could have learned a whole lot deeper about this subject, but Wikipedia was enough. But most people in this country, and I assume probably throughout Europe and throughout most of the Western world, and even among Muslim communities themselves, like, they don't even know what that word really means. Because they've accepted it as like modern vocabulary. Oh, well, you know, jihad made, like, I talked to another friend about it who actually was aware of this issue. And she says, well, yeah, that's just the meaning now. It may have started out with like a religious context, but the meaning now is a political one. And it's like, well, fuck that. What about the millions of people that are legitimately practicing the religion? And we've like marginalized them and shamed them into like not being able to talk about that aspect of their religious spiritual life with their peers out of fear that their peers will think that they're unreasonable, unethical people. It's messed up. It's really messed up. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today. I feel good about it. I want to talk more about it. I'd love to like have my friend come and talk, but this is how bad it is. My friend doesn't want to come on out of fear. Out of fear that if he says something, everything will be taken out of context, everything will be misinterpreted, and then, you know, because he's used to in his life, you know, he's an accomplished, self-made person, intelligent, hardworking, but, you know, definitely works within a handicap that like he's been aware of and has worked within his whole life. And so, yeah, he doesn't even have the confidence to come on and talk about these things out of fear that his name will be put on a list somewhere. And he's probably right, you know? And so that's why I said, well, can I talk about it? And I was like, I know I'm not going to talk perfectly about it, but, you know, I want to talk about it. And he says, yeah, sure. Give it a try. So I don't know if he's listening in now. I haven't received any messages from him telling me if I've been wrong. But, you know, I didn't go too deep into it, but, you know, I just wanted to go over the surface on this, that is just one example where reaching a consensus is going to be hard. And that's the first step. We can't talk about having a democracy. We can't talk about amending the Constitution. We can't talk about doing any of this stuff, writing laws or doing any of that, like within a true democracy, unless we can first educate ourselves and evolve beyond this, because like none of us are reasonable. Every single one of us is unreasonable, unethical within the context of developing a true consensus. And once we do that, if we ideally get to that point of understanding and respecting our differences, then we can say, okay, well, what are our similarities? And then that becomes that comprehensive, reasonable doctrine, like when we find those similarities. And then the next step after that, on Bitcoin, the next step after that is going to be to come up with like our constitutional consensus. And that's when we can like rewrite the Constitution and reevaluate what we're working with. And then after we do that, then we can, what Rawls calls in his book, overlapping consensus. So overlapping consensus is when we can dive deeper into like more localized, more specific consensus decisions. So this is like the more detailed lawmaking and regulatory stuff that we need to come up with. But we can't do any of that stuff. We can't have a true democracy until we first freaking educate ourselves and really push ourselves to go beyond just accepting the narrative. Because the narrative, including Wikipedia, like that is just one perspective. We got to go deeper, and like the closer we get to talking to the actual source, the better. You know, and saying that you have a Muslim friend, I have a Muslim friend, so I know all about Islam, is not it, because your Muslim friend has been so conditioned with being like a marginalized, alienated, unreasonable doctrine within society, within, you know, mass media, mass marketing society, that like even if you're dear friends and you guys love each other and you guys hold space for each other, and unless you let them know like I'm here to hold space for you to really share yourself, you probably are not hearing about this stuff because out of fear, just like my friend says, he won't come on and talk about it. So I mean, he's strong enough and confident enough to talk to me about it. And I've like opened up that space of like, yeah, let's talk about it. I need to be educated. Please educate me. But you know, most people won't do that. I was watching a live stream from the Activist Tea House. Shout out to Activist Tea House. They're doing a lot of great work. And Jen, one of the founders, is hosting a weekly book club talking about racism. And this last week, you know, there was a lot of discussion about that. And somebody in the audience introduced a term that I'd never heard before that seemed very powerful in regards to this specific topic about how irrelevant, you know, I have a black friend or I have a Muslim friend, therefore I'm not racist, or I know everything about Islam. That's totally irrelevant because, yeah, there's fear. There's fear of sharing our true selves because of these societal conditioning elements. But the term that she came up with was, God, what was the term? Non-threatening, gosh, what was it? Oh, I forget the term. But it's like non-threatening aggressive friendships. Like, and that's the key to true rehabilitation and true healing. Because we can learn from our friends. Our friends have a great deal to teach us about other perspectives. You know, our family too, but oftentimes families tend to have similar perspectives because you grew up in similar environments and similar conditions. And so you make friends and you can talk with each other. But if your friendship is not an ultimately safe, unthreatening, like we can just really run our mouth how we want to run our mouth, you will never learn from your friend's perspective because everything will be censored. Just like how we censor ourselves when we talk to a potential employer, or we talk to a police officer, or we talk with somebody that like is in a position to judge us. You know, so somebody who's grown up with this kind of oppression that I'm talking about today is not going to be very confident to share even with their loved ones about it. Because it's not intentional even. It's just conditioned from childhood. It's like, don't share about that part of your experience because no one's going to get it. No one's going to empathize with it. No one's going to hold space for it. And, you know, ultimately the only thing that will happen is something negative. You'll lose your friend, or you'll cause, you know, harm, or you'll cause disruption in your friendship. yeah, we got to get over that, because this is where we could do real education. It's not from my fucking live streams, but from real conversations that we have in our homes and at our schools and our workplaces with the people, with the most unique perspectives around us, diverse, doctrines around us. So, yes, it's important. If you feel like in your life, doctrines that are important to you have been alienated and marginalized, I encourage you to think about how to build the confidence to speak about that with the ones that you love around you. And start there. And once you build that confidence and learn the dialogue, learn the questions to ask, learn the questions to answer, you can start to scale that up to a larger and larger audience. I definitely do that. I mean, and the only space where I feel like I have a place to do that is with sexism. And, my newfound feminism is an important part of my work now. It is. It's a very, very important part of my work. And anybody who's going to tell me that I'm overly sensitive, fuck them. Because there's a lot of education to be shared about gender roles and sexualization, particularly with women. Although it happens in both directions, but it's particularly with women. But it's a completely different thing than when you're talking about doctrine. Like when we're talking about consensus and how to move forward into a democracy. The doctrines part is a big part of it. So we may say, oh, I don't hate Muslims. I think that they are fair and equal people that have the same rights that I have. And then you ask, well, what do you think of jihad? Oh, I think jihad's terrible. Whoa, those are conflicting things, because jihad is the core of Islam. It's the core of the daily motivations and struggle. That's the definition of it, the meaning of that word. Bitcoin, do you need a treat? Yes. Oh, I hope that makes you as happy as it makes me. And it can work in all directions as well. I mean, this conflict around reasonable doctrines and accepting someone else's reasonable doctrines and the politicization of specific doctrines. We could look at India. India is really suffering from this. And it works in both directions. Because there are some communities and places, Bitcoin, you say hi to my fella? Say hello. Look up there. Who's there? Who's up there? He says hello. Well, Mafalda, thank you so much for sticking around today. I hope this has been a good topic for you to kind of wrap your head around. And I know I always oversimplify terms and a lot of things that I'm talking about in regards. I mean, this fucking huge book here is not simplifying anything, but I'm condensing what I'm reading in here into very simple terms. But I think it's a good way to go. It is the good way. All right, guys, I think I'm gonna tune out. I have got some work to finish here in the office, and tomorrow, though, for Tea Talks, I will be at the Topia Tea House meeting with all the regulars. Looking forward to seeing Jeremy's beard. And of course, I'll probably bring up some of the topics that I talked about today. Maybe I'll ask the group there. Yes, Mafalda, we do have to start somewhere. Yes. We have to start somewhere. And within ourselves is the most powerful place to start. We've got to have our own personal jihad, inner jihad. of going through that painful process of seeing where we are at fault for something. And then we make those corrections, and then we talk about that with the ones around us, and hope to inspire them to do that similar work. So I'm definitely doing that work, and I need to do more of it, and will continue to do more of it. And I am grateful for this platform because I feel, yeah, it's definitely brought me there. All right, guys. What do we got? We got music is changing. We'll put on some raid music. I don't know, Nick. Are you the one on Twitch that's still here, Nick? Someone's still here on Twitch. I'm wondering if we should go raid someone. But if no one goes, I'll probably just get to work. Who's still going? Let me go see. John? Yeah, alright, so yeah, I'm not gonna raid anybody on Twitch. No one wants to go. And Bitcoin and I can't go raid by ourselves. You know, there's only so much raiding that Bitcoin and I can do. So I'm gonna sign out, guys, but I'll see you tomorrow for Tea Talks. And of course, Friday for Best Light Friday nights. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday or Thursday, Mafalda. Lucky you from the future. I hope it's great in the future for you. And I'll see you guys soon. Much love. Say goodbye, Bitcoin. Say goodbye.